All right, here we go. Vivek Ramaswamy, welcome back to Vlad TV.
It's good to be on, man. Appreciate you having me again.
Yeah, our second interview.
That's right. And we have, the third time might be the charm for when we get in the same location.
I know.
We're getting closer.
I know. We keep missing each other. I was actually in New York when you were in New York, but then your schedule and my schedule just didn't work.
Scheduling is a complicated thing, but we will make that happen. But third time will be the charm, but second time we got still remote. So
there you go.
It's good.
There you go. Well, before we start, you have a new book called Truths.
Yes. I just released it this week, and it's called Truths, the Future of America First.
Right. And the caption around it is, the way we find our path to truth is through free speech and open debate, including with those who disagree with us. So the point of the book is to arm people at home with arguments to talk to their left-leaning friends, their left-leaning family members at the dinner table.
That's exactly right. And, I think the way we get our country back is by all of us starting to speak in the open again. We used to be the country where you could disagree like hell. I mean, seriously disagree with your friends or your family and still get together at the dinner table at the end of it. I think we have lost some element of that in our culture. And I think we're actually, ironically, more united if we're able to freely and comfortably disagree than to actually create silos that stop us from talking to the people who disagree with us. So that's what this book is about. And, I in many ways did it as a reaction to some of my experiences in the presidential campaign. Because in the presidential campaign, I had a couple kinds of experiences in talking to especially, ideologues on the left. And some would be in the media, and I would treat it as an exercise where I wanted to defeat them. Those were productive at times, and you need to do some of that. But I think it's actually much better if you're not looking at that argument as one where you want to defeat or bury the person on the other side, but one where you actually want to convince them and bring them along. And so what I try to do in the book is give people at home a toolkit to be able to have conversations that they may not have the confidence to have, and it's actually contributing to our national division and distrust by people keeping their thoughts to themselves, as opposed to, without fear of cancellation, without fear of being made a pariah, actually being able to engage in open dialogue, which is what this country was founded on.
Well, you have a breakdown in the book with your 10 truths.
Yeah.
And I'll go ahead and list them. God is real. There are two genders. Human flourishing requires fossil fuels. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is no border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism lifts people from poverty. There are 3 branches of the U.S. government, not 4. The U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedoms in history.
Yes, those are my 10 truths in the campaign. And I've been vocal about that over the last year. And this book is based on that, though I add some small variations in content where a couple of the truths in the book, there's a few others like nationalism isn't a bad word. There's a couple of others, there's facts are not conspiracies. That's a chapter that I added in the book. But yes, those are the base 10 truths that you listed. That's the inspiration for the book. And then we go into some other subjects outside of those as well, like the areas I mentioned.
Well, let's talk about some of them. I agree with some of them. I disagree with others. Let's talk about the first one. God is real. You said believing in science and believing in God is not contradictory, but compatible. It's no coincidence that many of the greatest scientists in history believe in God. The Big Bang Theory is consistent with or even affirms the concept of creator because it suggests a definitive moment of creation from nothing. The fact that human beings across time and space share inherent concepts of right and wrong supports the idea that our ethical instincts are grounded in higher truths. And there's a few more. I don't necessarily agree with that. I was raised Jewish, but I don't necessarily believe in God. And when I interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an actual scientist, he said that through all his studies, he has yet to see an intelligent force essentially ruling the universe.
Mm-hmm. So science definitely can't prove the existence of God, but science definitely cannot disprove the existence of God either, right? Because science deals in the realm of what we actually know. And if God lies in the realm of that which we don't know, then science doesn't really answer the question of the why. It answers the question of the what. I say this as somebody who is a passionate follower of science myself. I studied molecular biology. I got my start in the biotech industry. So I appreciate the pursuit of truth through the empirical, scientific method, hypothesis-driven inquiry. But that only allows us to describe the world without the why. So one of the examples I quote in the book, is suppose instead this was my book, suppose this is a book of Shakespearean sonnets. And this is a thought experiment offered by somebody else, but I quoted in the book. And this actually person who I quote, to give credit to this person, is an atheist. And one of the things I love doing in this book is getting people who are able to articulate the other side. That means they really understand their own beliefs. But anyway, the irony is I'm quoting an atheist who actually gave a great argument that I find compelling for even the existence of at least the higher power. So say you're walking around in the forest, and in this world, nobody knows about the existence of Shakespeare. Nobody knows about the existence of even writers or authors. And you see a book of Shakespearean sonnets suddenly existing in the forest. And as a scientist, as an empiricist, you go and you find certain patterns, and it takes a long time. You start to find the way these words are written. You may call it the law of iambic pentameter. That's the way that Shakespeare wrote his sonnets, five parts, sort of syllables. So you call that the law of iambic pentameter. Then you say there's these little dots at the end of these lines. We'll call that the law of periods. That still doesn't answer the question of why this existed in the first place. And so it'd be assuming, like, you walk into a forest, you assume this book just self-assembled itself. The trees fell down, self-assembled themselves into paper, and all of that was a natural accident, as opposed to the fact that there was actually an author who took those pieces of paper and actually wrote on them and created that book. And I just thought that was an interesting analogy where you could study this book of sonnets, and believe that you would know everything about it without answering the question of the why of why it came into existence. And if you didn't know that, that's not your fault, but that doesn't mean that what you see denies that there's something higher. And so this idea that science is incompatible with religion is really what I take on in that chapter of the book. And it's also no accident that maybe not Neil deGrasse Tyson, but many of the most accomplished scientists of the last several centuries have also ended up being believers in God. And even the originator of the Big Bang Theory was, the Big Bang Theory, accounting for the origin of the universe, was affiliated with the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was actually overjoyed when that theory of the Big Bang actually came out. There's even a version of this where Maoist China was disappointed by the existence of the Big Bang Theory, because that might actually give credence to God in a culture that was, by their standards, forcibly communist and atheist at its core. And so I think that, you're not going to convince somebody in one chapter who doesn't believe in God in a single chapter through the arguments I provide that God is real. This has been an ancient debate for most of human history. But what I do hope to convince people of in that chapter is that we would be more united as a people, as a country, if we did revive that conviction in a higher power. You can call that higher power what you want. You can call it God. You could call it the supreme being. You could call it a spiritualist view. But if most people in the country got to the point where we believe that there is a higher power that puts us here for a purpose, that we would be better off and more united as a country. To be clear, Vlad, and I think you know my view on this, I'm definitely clear about it in the book, that does not mean the government should be forcing that view down anybody's throat. Part of what makes America great is that you're free to practice whatever religion you want, if you want, and you're also free to be an atheist. So this has nothing to do with what the government is supposed to do intrusively in your life. But the irony is, you don't have governments going around punishing people for being atheists today, not in the United States. But what you do have is you have a system that actually penalizes people for their religious beliefs often as well. And I think that we need to restore that culture of religious freedom so people who are people of faith are able to practice their faith without criticism or the government impeding their ability to do so. You saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic. I could give you multiple other examples of where that's true. But I think if I ask myself, do I think our society would be stronger and better off if we revived that culture of people who believe in God being able to express themselves in an honest and authentic way? I do think we would actually be better off for it. And that's actually the main takeaway point from that chapter, rather than trying to make the case for deism over atheism, which is a debate as old as human beings are.
Well, yeah, I feel overall religion is a positive thing. I think a lot of good things have come from religion and churches, synagogues, temples, and so forth. But I think the whole purpose of religion is to bring some sort of, logic to what happens after you die, which, biologically, it's over. You're done. There is no heaven. There is no reincarnation. There is no afterlife. You're done. And
how do you know that? How do you know that?
Well, nobody really knows that, but there's really has been no evidence that something else happens after you die in terms of an afterlife. There's zero proof for an afterlife. There is a lot of proof that it's over. When your dog dies, when a plant dies, when a bug dies, it's over. We don't think that they're going to go to heaven and live in, any sort of extraterrestrial kind of plane afterwards. I think it only applies to humans with most people who are religious.
I think that I'll give you two perspectives on that. One is my perspective might be of interest to you because I'm a person of Hindu faith, different than the predominant faith in the United States of Christianity, although a lot of the values are the same.
So is that Hindu is reincarnation? Is that part of the faith or no?
Well, I mean, the philosophy is a lot deeper than that, because I was going to give you a view of modern physics. I think the Hindu view of spirituality and of the afterlife is actually not only deeply compatible with, it's almost a similar description of what modern physics has to say about the universe too. That there are particles that come together to create life. They dissipate back into the universe when gone. Mm-hmm. That effectively is a good statement of what the Hindu worldview is of that part of our theology and what our afterlife means too. That mass comes together to create life. It embodies the soul. The soul lives on, but the mass that comprises the body still goes back to be part of the universe afterwards. That's a religious take on what actually is a modern description of what you'd call a principle of the conservation of matter. There'd be a principle in chemistry or physics that says matter doesn't either come into existence or disappear. It just shows up in new forms. That is in some ways exactly a statement of the Hindu theology around the idea of life, death, and the path between one and the other. To take a step back, you made the point that there's no evidence of heaven. Well, evidence is one way of accessing knowledge. The scientific method is surely a useful method of accessing knowledge. I don't think it's the only method of accessing knowledge either, though. And I think that there are many paths to truth. The scientific method is one of those paths, certainly from my own faith that I was raised in. I think this is part of my Hindu worldview as well, is that there are many different faiths that lead to the path to truth as well. There's actually a famous quote from Gandhi that said, "It is the wish of every Hindu that somebody, and that every person in the world at least finds God through one of the major world religions, even if it's not through Hinduism, but at least that idea that there is a higher truth and a higher power, that's something that all else equal, our society is better off if we create the space for that, rather than to say that we reject you as unsophisticated or that we reject you by saying that you have to do something that violates your religious conviction." I'll give you an example of that you have to officiate a wedding where you don't agree with the terms of that wedding because your faith stands in the middle. That's what the law is doing in many cases, and I don't think that that's good, even though I believe that everybody should be free to either practice or not practice, because that's the beauty of what the United States of America was founded on. What we really see today is a little bit of a cultural and even somewhat of a legal assault on that ability to practice your religion freely, and I don't think that's a net good development for us, and that's my main thesis in that chapter.
Okay, fair enough. We can agree to disagree on it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Well, another thing you mentioned in the book is the climate change agenda is a hoax.
Yeah.
You know, you said in the 1970s, climate alarmists warned that global cooling would end humanity. Just 30 years later, same climate alarmists warned that global warming would end humanity. Both are false. You know, and there's some other points that you make throughout. Now, I completely disagree with this. And here are some facts. 2023 was the warmest year since global records began in 1850 by a wide margin. The 10 warmest years in historical record have all occurred in the past 10 years. And Earth's temperature has been rising by 0.11% Fahrenheit every year since 1850, or about 2% in total. Now, where I live, for example, in Calabasas in Los Angeles, California, the insurance companies have all stopped offering fire insurance. At first, they just wouldn't bring on new people, but would grandfather everyone else in. And then they recently announced that fire insurance all across Los Angeles is actually being dropped because of global warming and how fires are becoming more and more common. I don't think that it's a secret that it's getting hotter every year. I don't think this is the media and so forth. I'm pretty sure where you live and where you travel, you've seen it for yourself. So how can you say that it's a hoax?
Yeah, so I say the climate change agenda is a hoax. And one of the things I do in this chapter is I separate that into 4 separate questions we could ask. One is the question which you raised. Are global surface temperatures going up? And we actually go into a pretty deep dive of the data on that question in this book. And the answer is actually, yes, global surface temperatures are going up. And that's a part where apparently you and I have the same opinion. It's not an opinion. It's actually just a basic description of the facts.
Yeah, it's a fact.
It ended up being a little bit more nuanced than people have made it out to be. There was 5 years where it actually went down 5 years straight. And I do point out a little bit of the hypocrisy because during those 5 years in the 2000s, nobody said anything about that. They tried to sweep it under the rug. But overall, if you look over the course of 50 years or 100 years, yes, there's a clear trend that global surface temperatures are going up by a little bit. Then there's the separate question. Are man-made causes responsible for that? Answer there's certainly a strong correlation, but whether that's causation or not is not yet as determined as I think a lot of the media would have you believe. You go to the next question of, are we sure that it's carbon dioxide or could it be another man-made cause? Because there are many man-made effects on the atmosphere. And against that backdrop, there's some facts that people might find surprising. And I don't expect you to know this at all, DJ Vlad, so there's not like a gotcha thing, because I wouldn't have known it had I not studied this either. But just for your own, gut instinct, what do you think the percentages of the atmosphere are of gases in broad strokes between, say, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide?
I'm not sure. I wasn't a biology guy.
Okay.
So
that's all right. Yeah, you have no reason. So the reason I bring it up is most people have the expectation that carbon dioxide is dominating our atmosphere. Let's just ground ourselves in some basic facts. Mm-hmm. So it's about 70, 78%, it varies, 75 to 78% nitrogen. You got a good amount of H2O in the atmosphere. You got other gases like xenon. Carbon dioxide is 0.04% of the atmosphere. So we're already starting from like a sliver of a tiny amount. Now let's look over the course of the Earth's history. That 0.04% right now that carbon dioxide represents as a percentage of the atmospheric gas is actually close to an all-time low in the history of the Earth. Okay, now let's go one layer deeper. The percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere during periods of ice ages was actually much higher than it is right now. So the idea that carbon dioxide is responsible for the warming of the planet is at least a questionable claim versus if it's other man-made behaviors versus if it's not man-made behaviors at all. So where are we? Are global surface temperatures going up? Yes. Is it due to man-made causes? There's a strong correlation between man on the Earth and the Industrial Revolution. But are we sure it's carbon dioxide? Then we're getting increasingly less certain. Then you get to the most important question of all. And this is the one that nobody asks, and that's what I do in this book, is ask, I think, personally, I believe is the most important and relevant question to this debate. Are we sure, are we even close to certain that a tiny increase in global surface temperatures is actually a bad thing for humanity? Or might it actually be a good thing for humanity? Or might there be some good and some bad that net against each other? And where I land in the book is there are some negative effects, there are some positive effects, there are strong arguments to be made that the net effect of those for humanity is actually net positive. But the idea that then we have to abandon our modern way of life to stave that off is actually something that's unarguably net negative for humanity. So on the positive effects, let's talk about deaths, right? If you care about the effects on humanity, here's a relevant attribute you might care about. What are human beings dying of, right? Human death rates are relatively, if you care about the flourishing and the life of human beings, you might care about what are the death rates. Well, here it turns out, and actually I draw from a good friend who wrote another book on this, Alex Epstein, 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures. Actually, this is Bjorn Lomborg, excuse me. 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. So if 8 times as many people are dying of cold temperatures than warm ones, but we're talking about a 1 degree Celsius increase in global surface temperatures, we're not even sure that's a net bad thing. It could be a good thing for humanity. Here's another fact. A lot of people aren't aware of this. The Earth, how old are you, Vlad, by the way? I'm 39. You're similar, right?
51.
Oh, okay. You look younger. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, back when we were in school, I think it was true for both of us, is they used to be really worried about the deforestation of the planet, right? The ungreening of the planet. Mm-hmm. Fun fact, the Earth is actually now more covered by green surface area than it was half a century ago. And the reason is carbon dioxide is plant food. Plants take in carbon dioxide. And plants also tend to grow in slightly warmer surface temperatures. So against the backdrop of all of these facts, back in the 70s, they used to be worried about an ice age. Now it's global warming. The reason they worried about an ice age is more people have died of ice ages in history than they ever have of warming. By the way, there was more of an ice age when there was higher carbon dioxide in the atmosphere a really long time ago. By the way, an increase in surface temperatures should actually predict less temperature-related deaths because way more people die of cold temperatures today. And by the way, the Earth is more covered by green surface area because of that carbon dioxide. I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever for us to be stopping the burning of fossil fuels. And by the way, selectively only in the West, but not in China, in the name of staving off global warming. Yes, that is why I say the climate change agenda is a hoax. And the people who are laughing at us at every step of the way is actually the Chinese Communist Party that's benefiting from this. China burned more coal last year than they ever have in their history. We burned less coal than we ever have in our history. And that's why electricity costs, most people watching this probably know this from their electric bills, electricity costs, energy costs, overall costs, because inflation is driven by energy costs, are up in this country. We're flogging ourselves. China's laughing at us at every step. They actually have a word for it even in Mandarin. I don't know if you've heard this word, baitsuo. Have you heard that word?
No.
Baitsuo is a Mandarin word that refers to progressive white people in the West, and they use it to laugh at us. It's like a derisive term in Chinese. It's like these like stupid liberals, like sort of what the Soviets used to call the useful idiot. The Chinese version of that is this baitsuo, sort of the useful idiot liberal white person is what they're referring to, and they use it in a denigrating way. That's effectively what underlies watching us flog ourselves for fossil fuels while they're burning those same fossil fuels in an even dirtier way over there in the name of staving off global climate change, when in fact it's far from obvious that any of this is net bad for humanity overall anyway. So I know that was a long rant, but I think that tells you the kind of arguments I try to make in this book, which is to take the best arguments for the other side, stick to the facts. Are surface temperatures going up? Yes, I analyze that pretty clearly and come to that conclusion, but get to the punchline that maybe we don't get to in our siloed political discourse. And, that's a big part of why I hope people read the book.